I'm Earl Hamner, creator and executive producer of The Waltons.
You can still see the set from The Waltons if you know where to look. In 2002, a museum board meeting in Virginia turned so violent that witnesses called it the worst thing they'd ever seen. The fight was over a forged check, a woman in prison, and a family secret spanning 30 years. The man they destroyed that night was connected to the show The Waltons. See, millions believed they were watching a show about Virginia, but everything was fake. The mountains, the house, even the town. The real story involves a Hollywood fire, a covered-up death, and why someone painted America's most famous house bright yellow. The story of the Waltons started with Earl Hamner Jr. In 1947, while still in university, Earl met another young writer named Rod Serling. Both had won a national radio scriptwriting contest. They stayed in touch. In 1959, Earl was broke in Hollywood. He'd written a novel, but no studio wanted to hire him. They said he didn't have experience, so he called Serling, now the creator of The Twilight Zone. Without hesitation, Serling brought him on. Earl wrote 8 episodes for the show. One of them, The Hunt, became a fan favorite. That break didn't just save his career, it opened every door that came next. In 1961, Earl wrote Spencer's Mountain, a novel based on his real family. The Spencers were fictional, but their struggles were the Hamners. When Warner Brothers turned it into a film in 1963, they moved the setting to Wyoming. The film made $4.5 million, but critics called it hollow. Earl's book, though, had heart. CBS noticed they needed something wholesome. In 1971, Earl adapted parts of Spencer's Mountain into The Homecoming, a Christmas special. Viewers loved it. The next year, The Waltons premiered on TV, and this time, the family stayed in Virginia, just like Earl remembered. But behind the scenes, nothing came easy. CBS only greenlit The Waltons because Congress was breathing down their necks. Lawmakers were demanding less violence and more family programming. So CBS threw The Waltons into a terrible time slot, up against The Flip Wilson Show and Mod Squad. Executives expected it to flop. They gave it little promotion and hoped it would quietly disappear after a season. The cast had their own struggles. The child actors, who carried much of the emotional weight of the show, were paid shockingly low wages. Eric Scott, who played Ben, later said, "We didn't get rich from that show. CBS made millions. The kids? Barely enough to live on." When producers sent flowers to adult star Michael Learned, they didn't even acknowledge the children. Learned was so disturbed by it that she demanded they at least be given a muffin basket. 3 muffins. That's all she asked for. Casting the children had been a careful calculation. Pam Polifroni, the casting director, avoided known child stars. She chose fresh faces, kids from families willing to accept very low pay. It saved money, but it also worked. The chemistry on screen felt real because it was. These young actors brought raw energy to the show, and they made the audience care. Still, the treatment gap was jarring. Adults like Ralph Waite and Michael Learned were shown appreciation. The kids weren't. Learned had to fight just to get them a small gesture. Back then, child actors had no power. They were expected to be grateful, no matter how successful the show became. Even Richard Thomas, who played John Boy, didn't believe the show would last. After the pilot aired, ratings dropped. It went from 46th place to 51st nationally. Thomas knew they were up against shows with more flash. He worried people would find The Waltons too slow, but he had faith in its message. "You can get cops and robbers any night," he said, "but only on Thursday at 8 p.m. can you get our kind of show." The Waltons didn't start off as a hit. In fact, when it first aired in 1972, it ranked a dismal 51st in the Nielsen ratings. The network didn't expect much. Promotion was minimal, and most thought it wouldn't last. But something unexpected happened. Slowly, more people began watching. Viewers told their friends, families tuned in together. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. And by the time the momentum kicked in, the Waltons had climbed to the #2 spot in the entire country. That kind of rise, going from near the bottom to the very top, was almost unheard of in TV history. The show struck a nerve during a difficult time in America. The early 1970s were full of unrest, scandal, and rapid change. People were craving something real, something warm, something that reminded them of better days. The Waltons gave them exactly that. It told the story of a family struggling through the Great Depression and World War II, but still holding on to love, faith, and each other. For 9 years, from 1972 to 1981, the series aired 221 episodes. It didn't rely on flashy stunts or big-name actors. It just showed honest life, with characters viewers could feel close to. And despite all odds, it became one of the top-rated shows in America. The show's success wasn't just about ratings, it was also about respect. Over its run, the Waltons earned 37 Emmy nominations and took home 13 wins. That kind of recognition proved that the show was more than just a crowd-pleaser. It was also high-quality television. Michael Learned, who played Olivia Walton, won 4 Emmy Awards for her performance. She took 3 of them in a row, in 1973, 1974, and 1976, something very few actors ever do. Later, she added another Emmy for a different show, Nurses, in 1982. Richard Thomas, who played John Boy, also won for Best Lead Actor in a Drama, becoming the youngest actor to ever take that honor. Even the supporting cast shined. Ellen Corby and Will Geer, who played the grandparents, both won Emmys too. The show also received several Golden Globe nominations and was awarded the prestigious Peabody Award. That award isn't about popularity or box office. It's given to shows that truly impact society. The Waltons was one of the few family dramas to ever receive it. When the Peabody Committee explained why the Waltons earned the honor, they pointed to its realness. The show didn't sugarcoat history. It showed how families struggled during hard times, how they scraped by, leaned on each other, and still held on to hope. And it didn't shy away from big issues either. It found ways to talk about poverty, war, and social tension without losing its warmth. The show offered more than just comfort. It helped people understand where they came from, and at the same time, it reminded them who they still wanted to be. But what really sealed the Waltons into cultural history was something small and sweet, something simple that stuck in everyone's memory. At the end of each episode, after the lights were out, you'd hear the voices in the house. One by one, they'd call out their good nights, and it always ended the same way. "Good night, John Boy." That line became more than just a catchphrase. It became a symbol of home. People across the country started repeating it. Families borrowed the routine in their own homes. Comedians parodied it. Other shows referenced it. And soon, it became one of the most well-known phrases of the 1970s. Even the BBC called it one of the most iconic moments of that decade. Because behind those words was something bigger. It reminded people of connection, of safety, of the feeling that no matter how hard life got, someone was always there at the end of the day to say goodnight. On screen, they looked like the perfect American family. A quiet home in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a strong father, a wise grandfather, a loving mother, and kids who always did the right thing. That's how millions saw the Waltons, as a symbol of old-fashioned values. But hidden in plain sight, the show was quietly spreading a very different message. One that would have shocked many of the conservatives who loved it. Mary McDonough, who played Erin Walton, later revealed something that most fans never caught. She said, "The Waltons were New Deal Democrats." That one sentence changed everything. It meant the family wasn't built on conservative ideals at all. They supported government programs. They believed in social safety nets. They trusted Franklin D. Roosevelt's vision of America, one where working-class families got real help from Washington. Earl Hamner, the show's creator, knew what he was doing. His family lived through the Great Depression. They backed labor unions. They needed government intervention to survive. And he wrote those values into every episode. It wasn't just subtle. It was right there, from the very beginning. In Season 1, the Waltons took on some of the biggest issues society still struggles with today: sexism, anti-Semitism, religious fanaticism, and even book burning. One episode showed the family standing up for a Jewish neighbor, while others in town turned their backs. Another storyline exposed the dangers of extreme religious views, making it clear the writers saw tolerance, not blind faith, as the moral path. In one chilling moment, books were burned in a rural community, drawing a direct line to Nazi Germany. These weren't just background themes. They were the heart of the story. And then there was their view on religion. A lot of people expected the Waltons to be church-going, Bible-quoting Christians, but that's not what they got. Grandpa Walton didn't even go to church. Some characters doubted, others believed. But no one was punished for asking questions or thinking differently. In one episode, an atheist comes to town and starts a respectful debate about faith. No one tries to convert him. No one damns him. Instead, the show encouraged viewers to think deeply, to ask what faith really meant, not just to follow traditions blindly. The same went for race. In the 1970s, most shows avoided hard conversations about racism. The Waltons didn't. John Boy, the show's quiet thinker and writer, regularly interacted with black neighbors, but not as charity cases or background characters. They were friends, equals, people who taught the Waltons just as much as they received. These relationships flew in the face of both historical reality and TV norms. In rural Virginia during the 1930s, this kind of racial harmony didn't exist, but on the Waltons, it was treated as normal, something to admire and emulate. All of this was intentional. Hamner believed television could teach, not just entertain, and that message reached millions. But not everyone understood it. In fact, some completely missed the point. On January 27, 1992, President George H.W. Bush gave a speech. He said he wished American families were more like the Waltons than the Simpsons. He thought he was siding with family values, but he accidentally walked into a political trap. Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons, fired back in one of the most clever TV moments of the 90s. In a special segment, Bart Simpson looks into the camera and says, "Hey, we're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression, too." It was a gut punch, because Bush didn't realize the Walton family lived in poverty, struggling under policies like the ones his party once supported. Their values weren't conservative. They were deeply progressive. And Groening made sure the whole country remembered it. Ellen Corby had always been the rock of the set. She was never late, never missed a day. But on November 10, 1976, everything changed. She didn't show up for filming. Will Geer, who played her husband on screen, immediately felt something was wrong. He didn't wait. He got a few crew members together and drove to her house. Inside, they found Ellen, 66 years old, collapsed on the floor. She had suffered a massive stroke. The stroke nearly killed her. She was paralyzed on her right side and could barely speak. For 15 months, she vanished from the show as she fought to recover. When she finally returned in the last episode of Season 6, it wasn't just a character coming back. It was a real woman showing the scars of survival. The producers didn't hide it. They wrote her real condition into the show. Ellen Corby stood in front of millions, visibly changed, but fiercely brave. It was one of the first times television showed a stroke survivor without makeup or illusion. And it wasn't acting. It was real. Just as fans began adjusting to Ellen's comeback, tragedy struck again. On April 20, 1978, Will Geer died. He was 76. The cause was respiratory failure. He passed away shortly after filming his final scenes with Ellen. His family gathered around him as he died, reading Robert Frost poems and singing Woody Guthrie songs from a friendship that had lasted since the 1940s. They had even made an album together in 1956. Will Geer had lived a life full of activism, art, and heart. And now, He was gone. The show didn't replace him. They couldn't. Instead, Season 7 opened with the family standing around Grandpa's grave. It wasn't just a fictional funeral. Ellen Corby, now playing a grieving widow, delivered the line that broke everyone. "Old man, you live in all of us." It was more than a script. It was goodbye to a man, a character, and a part of the show's soul. After that, the Waltons was never quite the same. Even before Will Geer's passing, there had been a slow unraveling. Richard Thomas, the actor behind John Boy, had already made his decision. From the beginning, he told himself he'd only stay 5 years. He stuck to it. He felt 5 years was long enough for one role. He wanted theater. He wanted range. He wanted more. Despite the show's massive success, Thomas knew it was time to leave. Producers didn't want to lose John Boy, so they made a rare, and some say ridiculous, choice. They recast the role. Robert Whiteman stepped in, but viewers couldn't accept it. The connection to Thomas ran too deep. Critics called it one of the most bizarre decisions in TV history. The show lost something vital when he left. Thomas later said that theater taught him the value of preparation. But it was television that gave him constant practice. Even so, his absence left a hole the show couldn't fill. The face of Olivia Walton was facing her own battles. She had won 3 Emmys. Fans adored her, but being America's mother wasn't easy. At home, she had her own children to raise. Filming a weekly show while managing family life nearly broke her. The fame came fast and heavy. Everyone expected her to be perfect, on and off camera. But life isn't like that. She often found herself caught between her public image and private stress. She was praised by producers, showered with flowers, but the child actors who looked up to her, they got nothing. That didn't sit right with her. She stood up for them. She demanded they receive gifts, even small ones, to feel seen. Her protective instincts weren't just acting, they were real. But all that pressure took a toll. The emotional weight of being Olivia Walton was heavier than anyone could see. It made her performance richer, but it came at a personal cost. Then there was another problem. It all started in February 2002, when Jim Hamner, Earl Hamner's younger brother and treasurer of the Waltons Mountain Museum, made a small decision that would explode into a disaster. Jim wrote a short letter recommending Judy Dudley, a longtime family friend who worked at the community center tied to the museum. He praised her work, saying she put in 30 to 35 hours per week and had done an outstanding job for us. He even called her a fine young lady. But 2 major mistakes turned that simple letter into a scandal. First, he used the museum's official letterhead and signed it as treasurer, making it seem like the whole board approved it, which they hadn't. Second, just days later, Judy Dudley was sentenced to 3 years in prison for stealing money from a firm in Charlottesville. Worse, she had access to the community center's checks. Then came the final blow. Investigators found 2 unauthorized checks, worth over $600, had been cashed. The panic spread like wildfire. As soon as Buck Whitehurst, the museum board's president, found out about the forged authority and the missing money, he demanded Jim Hamner resign on the spot. But Jim wasn't going quietly. He forced a full board vote, leading to an emergency meeting that became one of the ugliest moments in the museum's history. Director Mulkey later said, "They tore that man to shreds. It was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life." The board didn't hold back. Their criticism went far beyond the issue, attacking Jim personally and cruelly. Jim did fight back, but Mulkey said his words weren't nearly as harsh as what came at him. Eventually, Jim stood up, shaken and furious. "I don't have to put up with this," he said, and walked out. Even those who believed Jim was in the wrong were shocked at how brutally he'd been treated. The damage was done, not just to Jim, but to the entire Hamner legacy. When Earl Hamner heard what had happened to his brother, he didn't stay silent. He wrote a furious letter to the museum board. I learned recently that while representing me, a member of my family was caused pain, humiliation, and mental anguish at one of your meetings, he wrote. For Earl, this wasn't just about Jim. It was an attack on the family. Then came the hammer blow. I cannot continue to give you my support or allow you the use of my name. With that, Earl cut all ties to the museum that had been built in his honor. It wasn't just anger, it was about loyalty. Family came first, even if it meant stepping away from the institution that had celebrated his life's work. The moment he withdrew his name, everything around the museum began to fall apart. That summer, chaos took hold. Board members resigned right and left over the summer, and gossip flared, a witness recalled. Some were furious over how Jim had been treated. Others thought Earl had overreacted. Either way, people were leaving. Many had joined simply because of their respect for Earl Hamner. Now, with him gone, their purpose was gone too. The museum couldn't function properly. No leadership, no direction. The fighting had spilled out into the streets of Schuyler. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon the fallout was spreading far beyond the small Virginia town. People started taking sides. The reputation of the museum took a nosedive. Tourists lost interest. Donations dried up. What had once been a proud celebration of the Waltons and Hamner's values was now a fractured mess. And the worst part? The damage didn't stay within the boardroom. It cut deep into the family, too. Jim Hamner, once a proud face of the museum, was now a public embarrassment. He's been treated dirty, Jim said about his brother Earl, clearly feeling betrayed. Earl, too, felt regret. I now regret the way the museum was set up, he admitted. We never expected conflict, so we never built any voice for us. The irony was brutal. A museum built to honor the warmth and unity of the Waltons had become a battlefield that tore people apart. Earl's decision to stand by his brother was in line with everything he had ever written, but it came at a huge cost, both to his name and his standing in the place he once called home. Meanwhile, millions of fans grew up thinking The Waltons was filmed deep in the Virginia mountains. But the truth is, it all happened on a Hollywood backlot in Burbank, California. The Walton House, the barn, and even the Sawmill were all built from scratch on the Warner Brothers jungle set. This wasn't just any set. It had been used for Camelot and Fantasy Island, and even had a massive lagoon that could hold 270,000 gallons of water. Earl Hamner Jr., the show's creator, handpicked the white-painted house himself because it reminded him of his real childhood home in Schuyler, Virginia. To make it all feel authentic, the crew planted California vegetation that mimicked Blue Ridge mountain plants. The Sawmill, it actually worked. They even had real tools and operational lumber equipment, though for safety reasons, the actors didn't always get to cut the wood. While the outside was all Hollywood illusion, the inside was a whole different production. Every interior scene took place inside Warner Brothers studios on Soundstages 26 and 20. Stage 26 held all the rooms from the Walton family home: John Boy's bedroom, the kitchen, the main living space. Some rooms, like the upstairs bedrooms, were movable. That meant the set could be changed depending on the scene. Stage 20 was home to Ike Godsey's General Store, complete with real 1930s merchandise. The sound stages gave the crew total control. No noisy traffic, no planes overhead, no rain delays. They could move walls, adjust lighting, and get every shot just right. It made weekly TV production run like clockwork, but they didn't stop there. To save money, Warner Brothers reused its Western Street set for the fictional town of Rockfish. This same street had once been part of cowboy shootouts and dusty saloons. For the Waltons, it got a facelift. They swapped out hitching posts for sidewalks, changed signs to Depression-era shop names, and turned Western storefronts into Virginia businesses. Even the church that had appeared in Rebel Without a Cause got reused. Between scenes, set decorators would hustle to flip the town from the Wild West to 1930s Virginia. It was all about making the budget stretch without sacrificing realism. Drusilla's Pond, where the kids swam and fished, wasn't a natural Virginia spot either. It was part of that same jungle-set lagoon. Depending on the scene, the crew would drain it or fill it up. From the right angle, California hills in the distance became Walton's Mountain. They added trees, brought in ducks and frogs, and laid out a dirt road to the house. Camera tricks made it feel huge and remote. In reality, it was just a small corner of the studio lot. When they needed real mountain views, the crew drove out to Franklin Canyon and Angeles National Forest. Franklin Canyon Park, with its 605 acres and 3 miles of trails, had been a Hollywood favorite since the 1930s. Its lack of palm trees made it perfect for pretending it was somewhere in the eastern U.S. The lake there, called Meyers Lake, had appeared in Bonanza and Star Trek. It was also in the Andy Griffith Show. Angeles National Forest gave them even bigger landscapes for scenes that needed a wider shot. These locations brought a touch of real wilderness to balance out the studio tricks. Then came disaster. In 1991, a fire broke out on the jungle set. Caused by an electrical short, it burned down most of the original Walton House. Instead of starting from scratch, the studio salvaged what they could and rebuilt it a mile away at Warner Brothers' ranch. They used old blueprints and photos, mixing rescued materials with new ones to make it match the original. They placed it under big trees to recreate the same feel. The rebuild was so precise that most fans never noticed the difference. But eagle-eyed viewers did spot changes. The dormer windows were slightly off. The porch railing wasn't quite the same. Some of it was due to modern building codes. Some of it was just smarter design after decades of production experience. They even adjusted the roofline and tweaked the interior to make room for better lighting and camera angles. The paint and finishes were updated too, though they kept the same rustic vibe. That wasn't the end of the house's story. When Gilmore Girls needed a quaint New England inn, they turned the Walton House into the Dragonfly Inn. Out went the white paint. In came a bright yellow coat with green shutters. They added a 4th dormer and flower baskets on the porch. Inside, the house was transformed into guest rooms and dining areas. Even the yard was reshaped with parking spots and walkways. Still, longtime fans could see the bones of the Walton House under all that cheerful remodeling. The same thing happened with the town, Warner Brothers. Midwest Street, built in 1946 for Saratoga Trunk, became Stars Hollow in Gilmore Girls. It had already been used for The Music Man, Bonnie and Clyde, and Cool Hand Luke. Before it was Stars Hollow, it was Rockfish. The same gazebo, church, and storefronts were redressed for new eras. No new buildings were added, just new signs, paint, and props. It showed how good set design could stretch across decades and genres. Even today, if you take the Warner Brothers studio tour, you can still spot traces of the Waltons. The church and schoolhouse are still there, though they've been used in other shows. Tour guides will point out where scenes were filmed. The barn's old foundation is still visible if you know where to look. The dirt roads and stone fences haven't moved. Even the trees that were planted back then are now fully grown. They form a living memory of the show. But if you really want to feel the Waltons world, you've got to go to Schuyler, Virginia. The Waltons Mountain Museum is inside Earl Hamner's old school building, right across from his real childhood home. They've recreated John Boy's bedroom, complete with his glasses and writing tablet. The kitchen has 1930s appliances. There's a full model of the TV set, plus vintage cars and trains. You can even walk through a replica of Ike Godsey's store. While the props aren't from the show, the atmosphere is spot on. Just across the street sits Earl Hamner's real home at 128 Treetop Loop. Built in 1915 and bought by the Hamners in 1936 for $500, the house still stands on its soapstone foundation. Earl Sr. and Doris moved in when their son was just 6. They expanded it over time, adding a washroom and indoor bathroom. The original weatherboard siding is now covered with aluminum, and large oak trees shade the front yard. Inside, The museum preserves the Hamner family's actual living conditions from the Depression era. The town of Schuyler itself was once booming. At its peak in the early 1900s, it had over 7,000 residents. There were 3 cinemas, 2 hotels, and even an electric trolley. The Soapstone plant employed 1,300 people and powered 2 hydroelectric stations. But today, fewer than 2,000 people live there. Most of the old businesses are gone, but the new Alberine Stone Company still operates, employing about 50 workers. And then there's the walk. On Christmas Eve 1933, Earl Hamner Jr. walked 6 miles home through the snow to tell his family he had lost his job at the Soapstone mine. That story became one of the most emotional episodes in the Waltons. You can still walk that route today. It starts at the old bus stop and winds through the Blue Ridge foothills. In the winter, it's cold and steep. There are signs marking key points. It gives visitors a glimpse into the struggle and heartbreak that inspired the show. Back in Hollywood, the Warner Brothers studio tour gives a quiet nod to the Waltons at Stage 48. Most of the space is taken up by Friends and Harry Potter, but if you look closely, you'll find Waltons props and footage in the script-to-screen exhibit. There are old scripts, production notes, and sometimes even background audio from the show. Guides will talk about how the Waltons shaped family television and how its techniques are still used today. The jungle set still exists too, but it's changed. The lagoon is still there. Some old buildings remain. You can see how the crew used tricks to make it all feel huge and remote. They had to work around wind, heat, and unpredictable weather. But they made it happen. And on Midwest Street, you can still spot the church from the Waltons, now redressed for Stars Hollow. The same courthouse became a town hall. The same streets hosted John Boy and Rory Gilmore. It's all about angles, paint, and props.